Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Duran. I'm the senior fellow here at Hudson, and I'm also the director of our Middle East Center. I want to thank you for coming, and I want to thank Liel Leibovitz, our senior fellow here at Hudson, for organizing this. This discussion is critical, we think, to our national security. Recent events highlight the alarming rise in anti-Semitism. The Anti-Defamation League reported over 9,300 anti-Semitic incidents in 2024. That's up 5% from 2023. On May 21st, a terrorist murdered 2 Israeli embassy staff members, Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram, outside the Capitol Jewish Museum here in Washington, D.C. Yaron was a friend of several of us here at Hudson. On June 1, in Boulder, Colorado, a terrorist wielding Molotov cocktails murdered 12 people, including a Holocaust survivor, during an event advocating for Israeli hostages. Anti-Semitic rhetoric, often disguised as criticism of Israel, has moved from the fringe in our national discourse to part of the mainstream discussion. In 2024, half of over 5,000 anti-Israel rallies included anti-Semitic messages. This polarizes our politics, distorts our foreign policy, and aids our adversaries in sowing division and weakening our credibility globally. We here at Hudson are particularly focused on the behavior of hostile states. Anti-Semitism is not just a racial prejudice. It's a strategic tool wielded by adversaries like Iran, Russia, and China to damage our internal cohesion and to weaken our alliances. Iran has backed terror plots targeting Jews, such as the one foiled in Cyprus in 2023, while Russia tolerates incidents like the 2023 Dagestan riots. These actors routinely spread anti-Semitic propaganda in, among other regions, Africa and Asia. These are places where Jewish communities are sparse or totally non-existent. This is not just about Jews. This is an ideological attack on the American-led global order. Rooted in Soviet-era anti-colonial discourse, this propaganda is anti-Americanism to its core, a power move to undermine U.S. influence and fracture Western unity. Terrorism is propaganda by action. We are here today, therefore, to address anti-Semitism as a national security threat, a component of hybrid warfare. Recognizing its role in challenging the American order is essential to counter its impact on our democracy and alliances. Thanks to Senior Fellow Liel Leibovitz, we can tackle these issues directly. The stability of our democracy and the strength of our leadership depend on it. Again, thank you for coming, and I'll turn now to Zeynep Rabua from the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute to lead our first panel. Zeynep, the floor is yours.
Thank you all for joining us today. We're joined by Asaf Romirovsky, Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. We're very honored to have you, Asaf, for this discussion. I would like, first of all, to just ask you a very simple question. I mean, not quite simple, but what is going on? It's been an intense few weeks, but also months, also last years. There's all this outburst, rise of anti-Semitism, attacks, this spread of transnational anti-Semitic terrorism. I know that you've put so much time and resources in exploring the roots, so I'd like to ask you, what is going on?
How much time do we have? Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for Liel and for Mike and for Zeynep for the privilege to be here at Hudson this morning. The way I look at it, this has been really a process of the normalizing of anti-Semitism in American and Western society, and this has basically been the bursting and overflow of this normalization in Western society. What we've seen is the opposition, and really, when you talk about the opposition, to Michael's earlier points about the larger national security threat that we're seeing here. there has been foreign influence that has been laying the groundwork in American Western society, Soviet influence, Palestinian influence, that have been hijacking our institutions with the sole clear idea that if you win you may not be able to defeat the enemy, that is the original kind of the cardinal evil, the cosmic evil, that is Israel and Jews worldwide, you can win the hearts and minds. And winning the hearts and minds has been done by basically hijacking American institutions, Western institutions, such as the academy, journalism, and whatnot, and layering a narrative where actually in the discourse today, and I would say in the United States, where the debate about race, racism is only one thing. Anti-Semitism, which is racism, 100%, is not seen as such. And so people are able to carve or kind of get away by saying, I'm only anti-Zionist. I just hate to critical of the state of Israel in many ways, shapes, or form. I don't like Benjamin Netanyahu, but I'm not a racist. And they've been able to kind of get an exit strategy to that in that regard. But the understanding is, and this is where I think it's become so pernicious and problematic, is the fact that within this binary narrative that has been spoon-fed in a short but slow way and has been on steroids at this point, Jews, Israelis can do no right, and Palestinian sympathizers can do no wrong. And beyond all of that, which is what I think we've seen over the past few weeks now with Colorado and with Washington and with the attack, I hail from Pennsylvania, the latest attack during Passover on Josh Shapiro, the governor's house. You've seen a kind of a convergence of ideologies of what I would consider to be red, green, and brown alliance, all coming together under the animosity and hatred towards Jews. And every institution out there is putting out, I live and breathe in the academy. And so you've seen the kind of a blanket way within the humanities for sure, but I would argue within universities at large, where this has become the religiosity of the day. And we saw it first with waves of the boycott movement, BDS at large. But this goes way back before the BDS movement comes about. It's really, the understanding that Middle East money has bought chairs and departments with the idea of buying a very clear binary narrative. And this is the byproduct of all of that.
It's very interesting. You said something about the red, green, brown alliance. How would you define that?
So as far as, you're seeing socialists, you're seeing Nazis, and you're seeing Hamas, as far as, literally waving their flags and all coming together. You can see it from the background of the perpetrators of these attacks, who ideologically may seem that there's a disconnect, but really there's not. And this is what is, again, a feature or dimension of this intersectionality that we've seen alive and well and breathing. And within the intersectionality narrative, there is a pyramid. There's a hierarchy of the most oppressed groups in the world. And the gold standard of oppression in every way, shape, or form is the Palestinian narrative. And if you support every other underdog cause in the world, you must support the Palestinian cause. And so whether or not there is a connection or not, there is a simpatico, there are fellow travelers, they have to do that. And that not only has seeped into the general vernacular and the zeitgeist in Western American culture, but it's also seeped into the discourse within the American Jewish community, whereas Jews, who are also in a kind of a trap, where they too have to choose whether or not they are on the side of their Zionist views, if they have them, or are they going to choose a side of social justice and whatnot, and these globalist ideologies? And so you have a phenomenon which I think is become extremely pronounced, and I think even more visible post 10/7, where you actually have anti-Semitic Jews. And so also the Jewish community is not monolithic in its perspective. So it's another feature of this larger discourse.
we go back to this basically divide within Jewish communities, you wrote with Liel in City Journal, "Not Your Father's DNC," where you actually go back to the war in Vietnam and explain basically how there's this weaponization of every single issue, including of national interest. And how it's weaponized as part of this hybrid warfare, and it's become used for domestic purposes. Do you see the same thing with after October 7th?
100%. I mean, the weaponizing of the narrative is extremely layered. I mean, I know we looked at the case study of what happened at the DNC as far as the groups outside that supported, that were outside of the DNC and were inside the DNC, the voices that were included within the Democratic Party. And you had there, apropos my point about the red, green, and brown alliance, you had groups that were Muslim groups and Marxist socialist groups, and it's worthy of note, groups like the American Muslims for Palestine, which is the largest umbrella organization today that is involved in weaponizing anti-Semitism and terrorism. It is also one of the sponsoring groups of the Students for Justice in Palestine. It has about 300 chapters around American college campuses, which are the feeders to this ideology that is being put out there. So there's a clear weaponizing of the politics. Whatever happens on campus is not limited to campus. This is a feature of a larger cultural problem in American society that allowed this to come together. I mean, if you think about it historically, I mean, those of us who remember the fact where issues like anti-Semitism, U.S.-Israel relations were cardinal bipartisan issues. The case study today, that's no longer the case. And as a result of that, you are seeing, and especially you're looking at the trajectory of where the Democratic Party is going these days, you're seeing they're pushing away from those issues. And historically speaking, if you look even at the generation of people like Steny Hoyer and Nancy Pelosi and even Joe Biden's of the world, who grew up with the idea that Zionism in Israel was part of their narrative as well as combating anti-Semitism, and that kind of generational understanding is no longer part of the discourse today. So issues like that have become now partisan issues, which are allowing rise for all of this to come and are getting a pass. And I think that the trigger words that are being used and the current events as a result of the war in Gaza are also being parachuted. Obviously, they are correlated with all of this. I mean, the fact that Israel is blanketly condemned in the pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times as genocide, apartheid, starvation, famine. This is all part of the theater that Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood put out there, with the idea that the war is not limited just to the war on the ground. It is about the war of ideas. And how do you put pressure on the state of Israel? You create an environment where you flip the narrative. And so this has allowed the economic warfare, it allowed the cultural warfare. This is all part of that weaponization that you were talking about that existed. And it is also found open ears and open hearts within, the halls of Congress. And so...
Yeah. But what I find even more disturbing is, I understand the weaponization and using a narrative and twisting it, etc. But it's really legacy mainstream media referring to Hamas as a source. And how would you explain this total switch to legitimizing a terrorist organization of this sort and citing it as evidence?
So, I mean, look, we had, at the beginning of the war, all of us who were kind of observing and watching all of this, there were about maybe 4 or 5 weeks of a window of an opportunity of sympathy for what Israel has gone through, given the fact of the ample documentation of what took place on 10/7, the barbarism, the Islamic barbarism that took place in a Nazi-like way through what is considered to be in the Muslim world what is known as Ghazia. Ghazia is basically a high a high of like not only actionable stuff, but also validated by drugs, in addition to theological high of the killing. And so, you had this, this is the barbarism was validated, and you could see the killing, the raping, the maiming, all of that was there in evidence there. However, as time has gone by, to your point, the denialism has grown. And so this is also part of the success story and exactly what Hamas was basing their success on. I mean, the fact that we have evidence today we have actual students on American college campuses, namely Columbia, who were in touch with the hostage takers, and in Gaza, and were feeding information. And you had leaders of Hamas early on in the war who were going on an Al Jazeera TV and Iranian TV and thanking American college students for their support for the cause. That's where the narrative is flipped. I mean, it is insane to believe that, but this is where the sanitation or the sanitizing of Hamas is taking place. Hamas is an Islamist terrorist organization listed by the State Department as such, as a foreign terrorist entity. But we are allowing them to get a pass by saying we're believing the Ministry of Health of Gaza, which is Hamas. And so this is the same kind of evidence if you believe bin Laden. The problem has been really, I think, that even more to the goes much deeper, is the fact that many of these Islamist organizations have actually told us, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and within American Western society, we have not listened, and we've said, no, nobody can actually do that. We are dealing with a culture of death, and that does not gel well within the American Western discourse. And we believe that we can win them off with economic incentives and carrots. However, we're also trying to negotiate with an Islamist terrorist organization based on Western, tools with a non-Western entity.
And if you, just to go back to college campuses, etc., because it's really elite capture what is going on. Apart from, because you're also part of the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa, maybe you've seen all these anti-Westerner, the colonial, the proliferation of the colonial discourse within the understanding of the Middle East, and how. Do you think that played a big role in the understanding itself of U.S. interest in the Middle East and of Israel?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, the most pervasive way to look at that is that the Middle East, and in particular the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic, is looked at within American college campuses, and in particular within Middle East studies, is the white settler colonial narrative. But it was fascinating because if you looked at the following days following 10/7, the immediate response was, if Israel is indeed a white colonial settler project, then this is decolonialism, thereby it is justified and validated. And you saw individuals on American professors and students all claiming that this is justified, it is resistance, it is necessary. I mean,
sorry, I'm interrupting you, but for example, I looked into the killer of Yaron Leshinsky and Sarah Milgram. Mm-hmm. He's from Chicago. Mm-hmm. And he was part of these forums online on extreme left. They were they're calling for white genocide and all of these things. And apparently, Israel was part of this conception. Mm-hmm. So just to reinforce your point.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and the fact that Israel, it is fallaciously perceived as a white settler colonial project, and the fact that only Jews are only whites and Europeans. I mean, but, facts don't matter, and don't confuse them with the fact is the prevailing argument within this understanding. I mean, Middle East studies in this country have been hijacked since the late 50s, early 60s. We're talking about decades of foundation building, whereas to clearly articulate the fact that you want to flip the narrative. And you saw a significant shift after 1967. And so Palestinians are the eternal victims, and Jews and Israelis are the internal victimizers. And that has been codified within the American Academy. And by the way, this comes directly out of the anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism that existed in the former Soviet Union, that was adopted by the PLO in the 1960s, who were inspired by the tactics of the former Soviet Union, and they were also inspired by other groups on American college campuses, the Black Panthers, the Underground Weather Group. I mean, all these are organizations that were kind of Marxist ideology. They bought into that, and with the idea of buying into it. The founding fathers of the PLO, Yasser Arafat and company, all started their activism on campuses, so they knew this was fertile ground. These trigger words, justice, resistance, social justice, were all tested vernacular and phraseology that were used and bought in by the Soviets, and they knew what the reaction was going to be on the right and on the left, and they found these words by design. In addition to all of that, you've seen the influx of billions of dollars that were bought in by the Saudis, by the Qataris. I mean, the first Middle East Institute was the King Fahad Center at the University of Arkansas. Nobody cared about Arkansas, nobody knew about Arkansas, but it became a model and became an idea of how you can basically buy chairs in departments with the clear understanding that you could also, if so, you can successfully also buy the politics in which these topics are being taught. And beyond that, you've also seen a vehicle to allow Islamism and terrorism to hijack into the institutions under the guise of academic freedom. And so that was another element that played into all of this. And precursors to organizations like the SJP, we've seen in the 70s and 80s, you had groups known as GUPS, the General Union for Palestine Students, who were operating in Berkeley. Again, no surprise, no coincidence where you see these hot zones of campuses and how they're activating and how they're utilizing all of this. So by the time you reach this crescendo of 10-7, you've had a legitimate foundation building, whereas they've been playing, the long march on education, and they have been successful about it. We may have bought the buildings, but they've bought the education. From a cost-benefit analysis, they've done a much better job. And
you said something I found interesting, that it's on the left, but also on the right, the Soviet tactics. I mean, now it seems that it's also on the right. How do you explain that? Is it a hijacking? Is it a...
You see it across the board. I mean, these concentric circles go left and right polarized, and they connect at some point.
It's the horseshoe theory.
Yeah, it is the horseshoe theory, exactly. And it all comes together. I mean, for years, the left has been seen as having morality, the moral high ground. People ignored groups like Antifa and other kind of groups that were out there, Black Lives Matter and other kind of elements that have incorporated within the Black solidarity movement as far as the pro-Palestinianism. The right has also been able to kind of come around to all of this, and you see it today also in politics on the right as well. So you have the polar right and the polar left all coming together with the common denominator of the anti-Semitism. Though I would argue that the anti-Semitism on the left has gone unchecked for much longer than on the right. I think that now it's converging in many ways, shapes, or form. But these ideologies, and if you profile and look at the individuals who are perpetuating a part of these attacks, you are seeing evidence to left, right, and center, left and right and not center, coming together on this greater hatred.
Yeah, and so what do you think U.S. policymakers should focus on when it comes to... It seems that even diagnosing the threat is a problem here.
100%. I mean, first we have to understand that anti-Semitism is racism, 100%. I mean, and if we're committed to combating racism, if we're committing to dealing with that, we have to understand what the root of the problem is. If you look as a case study at American college campuses, they have, for example, refused to accept the IRA definition. The IRA definition is the one that's most accepted by the majority of states around the world, including the one that the State Department operates based based on, which includes within that definition forms of anti-Israelism and anti-Zionism as a feature of that. But the university has deflected and refuses to accept that, predominantly as a result of their faculty and others who feel comfortable being pronouncedly anti-Zionist, or I would also call them anti-Semitic, but they have a way to kind of piecemeal it and carve it out and say that's okay. So that's a problem. That's problem number one. Liel and I, have been writing about this issue for quite some time about, the concept of what we call deporting and defunding, as far as terrorism and as far as doing better background checks when it comes to universities, when it comes to the admissions process. Also has to do with the idea that one of the strongest committees in higher education has to do with tenure and promotion. So it has to do also with faculty. Faculty are critical into all of this. And not today, not only do you have Students for Justice in Palestine, you have FSJP, Faculty for Justice in Palestine, who are also faculty activists and a part of that ecosystem that is bringing about graduate students and training them, and they're all part of that same orthodoxy. That also needs to change. But the fact of the matter is that we need to start looking at this issue as, according to, the architecture of free speech, you're allowed to be an anti-Semite, but the fact of the matter is, this is not a matter of free speech. This is a matter of national security. The fact that we are allowing terrorism to thrive on our institutions in order with a clear understanding of giving a pass by academic freedom. And there's a playbook to all of this. There's a clear, concise playbook. We're here in Washington. The idea, you see a significant growth of individuals who support these issues, who go into American law schools and then become congressional aides, as we saw, for example, with the case study of Maher Bitar, who was on the National Security Council. The idea is, how do you create more Maher Bitars, more Ilhan Omars, more Rashida Tlaibs in order to create policy? So this is the modality that is being played out here, as far as, using the American system to turn America on its head. And by positioning Jews, or the hatred for Jews, which is what the late Bernard Lewis used to call, that this hatred is positioning Jews, or the hatred of Jews, as a cosmic evil, and hating them more than necessary than any other group out there. This has been played down, and they in order to try to say no. The people that really, Jews they're the powerful, they're the conspiracy. This is where it's all playing out within using anti-Semitic rhetoric and conspiracy theories to, basically push Jews outside of the conversation. And the only ones who are accepted in the conversation are the ones who feel the need to root their Zionist, identity out of them, and that this is, they're the ones that are okay.
Yeah, you said something that, you said using the American system to turn America on its head, and you also mentioned earlier the American Jewish communities, because the normalization of anti-Semitism is one thing, but now it's the normalization of terror. And they have to also internalize it, see it as part of the daily life now. How do you see American Jewish communities dealing with this, ideologically, but also practically?
That's a hard question. It's a hard question because it's a loaded question, in the sense that you have a phenomenon of what is considered to be, or kind of a look at it of I'm Jewish, but, and we're, and when they're, when I debate individuals on campuses, I find a lot of them starting off, but I'm Jewish, but I had a bar mitzvah, I was circumcised, whatever it is, to kind of prove that they have literally skin in the game. But then they can.
Can you give us an example of like a campus? Which campus, for example? I don't know if you can say that.
I'm talking about the kind of individuals that stem from historically from the Noam Chomskys all the way to the Peter Beinerts of the world, and then you have also Israelis who are also feel the need, like the Elon Papas of the world and Avi Schleims, and there's a whole corpus of a need to twist the historiography of Zionism, but also the understanding of looking at how Jews fit into the conversation. It's what, I consider this to be a kind of a Jewish trap. I mean, look at, for example, the case study of the American Jewish Studies Association. Those individuals who study Jewish history, they want to focus on Jewish history as a history on its own, but at times also trying to not deal with the Zionist element of it. So they try to put that aside, and they feel the need, so if they want to be accepted within rank and file, within their peers, they have to put that aside because, apropos trigger words and the weaponization, when you say the word Zionism, the immediate reaction is racism. So I don't want to be called a racist. I'm just, I fall within this normal. And the Jews for years have been dealing with the abnormality of Judaism, and so how do they fit in within to be seen as normal within Western society? A few years ago, there was a book written years ago during the 30s and 40s called the non-Jewish Jew. Isaac Deutscher wrote this book that had to deal with the fact that Jews are only normal or perceived to be normal when they are in the minority and they're not surrounded by a larger population of Jews, because that takes away from them being able to stand out. So we have to kind of create this layering of how that all plays into where they are. But the bigger problem is the politics of this. I mean, and wherever you are on the Jewish, the Jewish community, in contrast to the Islamist narrative, is not monolithic. You've got Jews on the right, left, and center. And Israel becomes a heated debate for them, and where they feel about Israeli leadership, and Israel is governed. It is fascinating to look at that historically speaking, because the founding fathers of Zionism, wherever they were, left, right, and center, religious and secular, they appreciated, at the end of the day, of the creation of the Zionist enterprise, of the Jewish state. The problem has been, generationally wise, when you look at the environment today, is that the younger generation doesn't remember a time that Israel did not exist or was ever right. So for them, Israel is, creation is part of the original sin, and they are grappling with what Israel looks like to them. That understanding has also trickled down into the layer of how these topics are being taught. And I think that part of and this is, I know you asked me a short question, but there are no short answers
Thank
here.
you.
I mean, the real issue, that I'm trying to get at is the fact that Zionism should be and is part of Jewish identity. And the Jewish community is grappling today with the kind of Zionism that is. And so some Jews feel uncomfortable with that reality, and where you have a creation of saying, I'm Jewish, or I don't want to be part of that, or I'm openly, there are anti-Semitic Jews, different kind of garden variety from Turei Karta to others. But that's part of the issue, and to figure out where that means. And I think that, today we're facing a reality where there is still a coming to terms with Zionism today. It's not the one of 48, it's not the one of 67. We're talking about the one of 2025. And so where do we stand, and where do we draw the red lines when you're looking at this reality of a weaponized anti-Semitism, when there is a state of Israel that is extremely analogous to the kind of visceral hatred that we saw back in the 30s in Nazi Germany?
Well, what is actually fascinating to me is that, of course, there is a bigger Muslim diaspora in Europe, but they're very vocal in the United States as well, and a lot of them are much more radical in the sense that if you look at the Middle East today, you have the UAE, Abraham Accord countries, Morocco, etc. The idea that Israel is part of the Middle East and then normalizing with a strong, powerful technology, a country that has high tech, high capabilities, has nothing but benefits to the region. And so how the Muslims in the Middle East are dealing with Israel, it's becoming much more different about how others in the West are dealing with it. And it seems to me it's a bigger gap now when it comes to anti-Zionism, because the audience is actually shrinking in the Middle East and getting bigger in the West.
Well, 100%. You bring up some really important points. A, the disconnect of the reality, of the perceived reality that is showcased in the West and U.S. Western campuses versus the reality in the Middle East. There has been a shift as a result, as you said correctly, with the normalizing that Israel has with the Arab world as it relates to the Abraham Accords, where they have seen Israel as an added value rather than a liability. And that kind of collaboration is critical, not to mention the fact that it is rooted in reality. I mean, the fact that there is a greater threat vis-a-vis the largest destabilizing force when it comes to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and where Sunni countries are able to come together and see Israel as this added value and working together. And if obviously everybody now is looking towards Riyadh as far as what that will look like. But even the relationship that Israel has had with the Gulf has been very positive during the COVID years. It was about, as you said, technology and medical benefits and whatnot. It was fascinating. Some of the conversations that were going on social media and early on after the Abraham Accords began, it wasn't that they were less Palestinian or pro-Palestinian in their sympathy for the Palestinian brethren. What they were arguing to them is that the modality that they've been using to try to normalize ties with Israel is wrong, and they should try their model as far as the economic and the cultural benefits that are worthwhile. However, of course, that says the disconnect between the Palestinian case study and the Arab world at large. But you are correct. On the other side of that, and also critical to look at that, is the ideology and that is coming into Europe and the United States when it comes to Muslim immigration, and they're coming in with their own ideology. If you look at Europe today, and if you look at what has been happening in France and the UK and in Germany, and as far as some of the terrorism that we've seen within Europe, and it's coming from these communities. I mean, when Germany took in many of the Syrian refugees and have allowed for, there was a policy, we're going to teach and democratize these societies in order to, dissipate their Islamist narrative. I mean, that was unsuccessful. You have Hezbollah neighborhoods in Germany. And so there is a challenge to all of this. And if you look at the rates of growth within the Muslim community in the UK, that's also a challenge. Again, not that, as far as, as it relates to, their doing proper background check as far as the ideology. That's the issue. I mean, again, you have to kind of look, it's a very complex issue, but as far as, where these societies have allowed to thrive and the ideologies that are coming in, that's part of the challenge that we're seeing.
Yeah, it seems to me that, especially in Europe, also maybe in the United States, probably more and more, because I saw some Iranian Shia groups proliferating in Texas and some other places. It seems that the secular liberal system is, because it values free speech a lot and correctly, does not allow blasphemy laws, etc., has a problem when dealing with extreme ideologies and in tackling them and countering them, because it identifies them as legitimate ideologies and legitimate public opinions, etc. And I think this is where there's really a hijack, because they don't see that it's actually a national threat, especially in the United States.
Right. I mean, the American dream construct has kind of built, on the idea of, the melting pot of American society and whatnot, and the fact that everything is achievable and things along those lines. Some of the challenge is, of course, that there has been an abuse of that right. And if you look at how that is played into, as I said, I think that the case study of American universities, which are part of the meritocracy of American society, that have allowed themselves to be hijacked by groups that are coming in. Not to mention, for another feature that needs to be looked at very carefully is the amount of foreign money and foreign students that are coming into the institutions. And so if you look at what's been happening now at Harvard, 27.3% of Harvard student underbody is foreign. Columbia is even worse. It's about 58%. I mean, and they're paying full tuition. Universities don't say no to money. Okay, that's great. But there's a question also is whether or not these American institutions are still going to be American institutions. And again, if you get the right, you get the privilege, you have to play by the rules. If you're not playing by the rules, and if you're coming in to try to circumvent the process, but use it and abuse it, then there has to be consequences. And I think that that's also part of what's playing out here. And by the way, that hijacking of the institution is not only coming from Middle Eastern money. We're talking about Russian money, Chinese money. I mean, these are, to Mike's points about being a national security issue, these are all, these are not friendly, and these are not allies of the United States, but they are trying to hurt the United States in that way by using it from an insider's domestic perspective outside, and to create this layering of this foundation building of the anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism in our own institutions.
So if I have to sum up that China, Iran, and also Russia benefit from all of this, do you have in mind some other groups or some other communities that benefit from this?
Well, I mean, I think that, Russia, China, Iran, I mean, the Middle East, these are where all this is coming from. I mean, the fact that we have evidence today, if you look at the, of late, I'm about to come up with a whole study that we did on the political economy of anti-Semitism. And that study relates to all these monies where they've come from and the influencers that are bought into that. So you're talking about large sums of money that have gone in to create a certain ideology. I mean, talk about China and Russia and Iran. We know for a fact that Iranian money was involved in the encampments. We know that, we know that other kinds of money, as far as communist money, people like Fergie Chambers and others who gave money to all of this. There's a slew of philanthropy that has gone into buy a certain amount of ideology, and they are tied directly, talk about the political toxicity. Many of them are also tied into the Democratic Party. And so there's a line that connects between the politics, of campus politics directly into general politics, which is exactly, to your earlier point about why we took the case study of the DNC, because there's a clear line, there's a clear playbook. And so there needs to be a significant crackdown on these tainted monies. And what exactly are we buying? What exactly are we buying? What's the product of all of this?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Asaf, for all of this. Very helpful. I suggest we take a few questions and then a break, and then for the next round. Yes.
Thank you.
So, Asaf, thank you so much. And lawsuits are nobody's idea of fun, especially on a Monday morning. But following your work, I know that you have been studying one particular case that seems kind of instructive in understanding the landscape and how it works. It happens to be the case of the first American ever killed by Hamas, I believe 15 or 16-year-old boy named David Boehm, who's standing in a bus stop outside of Jerusalem. He was assassinated by Hamas in a sort of attack of opportunity. And in your research, you sort of detailed how the organization that were actually held responsible by American courts. This is not some assertion of nefarious Zionist forces, but actual legally binding rulings have been not only evading justice for a very long time, but also reinvigorated in recent years. You mentioned in brief some of their descendants, the American Muslim for Palestine, etc. So I was wondering if you could sort of tell the story, because I think it's actually instrumental in understanding how these people organize on American ground.
Sure, that's a good question, and it's critical to understand. So, what you're referring to is the case of the Boyne family against the American Muslims for Palestine, which has now been going on for over 20 years. David Boyne was killed in 1996. There was an unpaid judgment of $156 million. And the group at the time, and what was unique about, to Liel's point, also worthy of note, is that up until 9/11, American foreign policy, we went after state-sponsored terrorism. Post 9/11, the rules changed. You go after also the charities, which allowed this entire opening of a whole new dimension of looking at charities who are operating and funding, in the United States. And so that group that was sued, which was called the IAP, the Islamic Association for Palestine, so-called, went out of business, and they couldn't pay the judgment, even though the judgment was ruled in the favor. And then lo and behold, all they did was, which is what the case is arguing, is change their name. And opened up a new organization called American Muslims for Palestine with the same addresses, the same phone numbers, the same leadership. All they did was basically change a shingle on the door and opened up for shop again. And so the case has been going on now. Was reopened back in 2017, 2018, going after exactly these very groups with the theory of what is known as the alter ego theory, that basically these are successor organizations of the original organization. AMP is a sponsoring group of SJP. As I mentioned before, they are the #1 springboard for Palestinian Islamist activism on American college campuses. These groups have direct ties to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood at large, apropos my point about fighting terrorism on American college campuses. And they are the ones who also provided, there are individuals within AMP who have been working, doing what they call student activism organization, to help activate students on the college campuses. They're the ones who also provided some of the toolkits that allowed the activism on 10/8, on 10/9, of how to activate the American college campus. And so this is the legitimization or normalization of these groups that have been codified using their charitable status in order to normalize terrorism on American college campuses through their different arteries. They do conferences, they do panels, they have toolkits to make all of this happen. That's part of the problem. And Liel, you and I identified, these were the same groups who were protesting AMP when Netanyahu was here in Washington. They were the same groups who were protesting outside the DNC. And so this is a case study, and by the way, I would argue that the precedent that was created within the Boehm case, it goes back to another case called the Hoyland Foundation, which has really been the gold standard. A lot of the cases, the litigation that is happening now with other cases around when it comes to SJP and victims of Hamas, all started with this. And so litigation and lawfare is a critical tool that we have to go after and making sure that we clean not only the campuses, but also terrorism in the United States. And I think, and this is, it is about, and obviously at a micro level, about bringing justice to the Boehm family, who, by the way, one of the top leaders of Hamas, who Israel took out, Salah Haruri, same individual who used to meet with Hassan Nasrallah and others, was the one who called the kill on David Boehm, moved up in the ranks. That's how far deep and how how high up it went in the ranks of Hamas. But this is a tactic, and I think that this is something that we need to be working on and be aware of and crack down on. Their 501c3 status and everything else that they're doing, their activism is something that is worthy of going after.
Interesting, Mike.
Thanks, Asaf. Yeah, my ears perked up when you said that there's Iranian money that is fueling a lot of this. I don't want to steal your thunder. I know you have a report coming out soon, but actually, I do want to steal your thunder. Can you? Can
Your
you,
shop.
can you give us a little more detail about how much money, what are the conduits through which it came, and where did it go exactly?
So it's you can steal my thunder. You're the host, so I'm more than happy for you to steal the thunder. We know that there is Iranian money. We don't know all the amounts that are going in. We've seen with between 2 and then $500,000 and other monies that have come into some of the encampments. We've been trying to look at through FOIAs and other kinds to kind of look at exactly some of these monies, but we don't know. We don't have exact. We've seen the pattern. We haven't seen we haven't seen all the numbers yet, and that's something that everybody's trying to look into. What we do know is also that some of the Iranian studies departments and centers have also been used to launder some of the regime's ideology on the campuses as well. So some of that same pattern of behavior has been used, within the American college campuses too. But that's part of what we're looking at to expose, as far as these numbers of money and whatnot. But there's definitely signs of all of that.
Yeah, actually what I find even more sinister, because I look at it West Africa a lot, and the Islamic Republic sometimes uses not money, but they would have someone who studied in their seminars in Tehran, and they would study the doctrine, the revolutionary doctrine, the Shia revolutionary one, and they would go abroad, teach a few people, and then they would go back to the Islamic Republic, and then they have this community that is growing and growing. I mean, they've done that so far in Europe a lot, especially in Britain, but.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is, you get a position. I mean, there have been a plethora of professors who have been supportive of Hezbollah and have gone to funerals and other kinds of activities. I mean, there was, it's been happening all over the place. I mean, and this is part of, people like, Judith Butler, who teaches literature, at Berkeley, who says, well, no, Hezbollah is legitimate. Hamas, these are freedom fighters. These are social justice. I mean, again, the ideology, is layered on the one hand, and then you have local individuals who are coming, foreign individuals who are coming in, and are coming in. By the way, apropos your earlier question, between the 70s and 80s, and this is something that has been grown on that foundation, the largest recipient, for example, of Fulbright scholars were Palestinians, coming in with State Department scholarships into American institutions. So there's been a way of visiting professors, individuals who are coming in. Back in 2004, I exposed a member of Hamas who was teaching Islamic studies at Florida Atlantic University. His job was to write textbooks for Hamas. He was teaching Islamic studies at FAU. What do you think he's teaching? I mean, and he came on a Fulbright scholarship. And so this is not new. And so we should not be naive to believe that we're not exposing ourselves by, our freedoms, are great, but we have to do a much better job on the background checks. And not go around blindly and believing that everybody's coming here with altruistic viewpoints and doing good around the world, because that's not they're coming with a clear they got a plan and they're following it to a T.
They got a plan, and we should not be naive. Asaf, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'll let you get a break and next panel.
My numbers are All right, I suppose. Hello. Thank you, everyone. It is a tough act to follow. So much good cheer and good tidings as we have just received. But to us falls the grim task of building up in this conversation and trying to come up with, dare I say, if not solutions, then at least beginnings thereof. Before we get to very concrete brass tacks and entertain ideas that I admit on the outset are not ideas that I would have even begun to tolerate even 3 or 4 years ago. You know, I started my academic journey in film school, where my specialty was zombie movies. I think my expertise is actually very relevant to the moment because this feels like a kind of, infestation of brainless creatures who are here to sort of aggress on you. But before we do any of this, Mike, I remember very distinctly about a year ago, there was some tweet by the Ayatollah Khamenei congratulating American college students for quote unquote being on the right side of history. And I laughed it off as a very amusing, sort of surreal bit of American political theater. And you were far grimmer. You said, no, don't laugh it off. This is actually a much bigger, more worrisome trend. So I'd like to kind of start by asking you to build on what Zeb and Asaf were talking about, the component of kind of like global and state actors in what we're seeing right now, especially Iran.
I'll do that, but can I talk about us a little bit before talking about them?
I would love that.
Because I'm a refugee from academia, as you know, and I think the fundamental rot in American academia is not the foreigners, it's American academia itself, and American academia was taken over by progressives, and by more specifically transnational progressives, and they have an ideology, and the ideology is that the United States needs to be fundamentally transformed. Not just the United States, but all systems of government in the world that are based on nationalism rather than the transnational progressive ideology, which seeks to build. It's a utopian ideology. It's akin to Marxism. It's kind of a fellow traveler, although it isn't necessarily Marxist because it's not economically based. It focuses on identity rather than, these days, on identity rather than economics. And when I was really struck by some of Asaf's figures, that over 50% of the undergraduates of Columbia are foreigners. That's the administrators at Columbia University do not feel that it is their job to educate Americans for democracy, which is what previous generations, pre-1960s generations of educators in America thought. Our schools are national institutions, and the job is to create well-educated citizens who can go out and help their fellow citizens debate their democratic fate together. When I was a grad student in Princeton, there was a coffee shop, and the coffee shop had on the top of a pillar, we had to look really hard to see it, way, way high, was a telegram that the president of Princeton sent to Franklin Delano Roosevelt after Pearl Harbor, and said, "Dear Mr. President, the faculty and the administrators of Princeton University hereby," this is the day after, "step forward to assist you in this hour of need, and I hereby put at your disposal all of the resources and all of the faculty of Princeton University.
Could you imagine that today?
Yeah, you can. You can. The faculty. He put the faculty at the disposal of the president of the United States. Imagine if the president of a major university said to Donald Trump, here's the faculty. Of course, they would have a revolt because the faculty have all been selected. They have all been selected by their adherence to transnational progressivism. It's impossible to become a tenured professor in the humanities and increasingly in the sciences if you don't adhere to this ideology. The ideology then dictates that we want to bring in foreigners because we want to bring in foreigners to change American society, but also there's a financial element as well, right? So Asaf said American universities, they love money. That's true to a point. They love money that can be put that can be put directly or indirectly in the service of transnational progressivism. They do not. They have no problem rejecting large amounts of money that are in the service of American nationalism and patriotism. They don't believe in it. They want to destroy it.
And look, I'm also a refugee from academia, as I think at some point we all are, or will soon be, Asaf. And I trained under the late Todd Gitlin, who famously said, when the right march in Washington, the left march in the English department, which is understood as a sort of a joke, because what kind of power and influence, what kind of influence would you have? And I feel that this is a process. The process you're discovering is a process that we have been observing and even kind of good-naturedly laughing at for at least 30 years. But I think Hemingway's or Fitzgerald's famous quote about going bankrupt, slowly, and then all of a sudden,
yeah.
I feel like academia was sort of radicalized into this ideology, slowly, and then all of a sudden. Is there a moment in which you could point and say, okay, look, whereas in the 90s when I was in Princeton, it was kind of a little bit of an annoying thing. It was understood that this was the ascendant ideology, but you could still sort of see a way out. You could still see a possibility of reform. You could still see something, because right now, I personally see no possibility of reform.
I see no possibility of reform, really. I mean, I really applaud the Trump administration for going after DEI, for taking these colleges to task for their infringement on the rights of the Jewish students, and so on. And I think it's very useful. I think it will probably have a beneficial effect, but only within certain very clear left and right boundaries. Because the administrators, one of the things that was going on when I was at university and grad school and as a professor was there was this unbelievable proliferation of administrators. There was who were all schooled in DEI. They were the university was getting more and more top heavy with all of these assistant deans, assistant deans for this, assistant dean for that, all of which had a DEI.
Harvard has something like 2 for each undergrad student, which is an astonishing number.
Seriously.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And already there should be, I don't know how you would do it, but there has to be some sort of ratio where you don't get government money if you have. If the ratio of administrators to students, surpasses a certain number, but you have the administrators and then you have the faculty. It's very, very hard for these. Even if you have an administrator, that a university president that wants to move in a different direction, it's very hard for the president to do so. If the faculty are dead set against it.
Look, a number of years ago, I wrote a piece called "Get Out," in which I advised Jewish students, in particular. Right now, I would extend.
Wasn't that a movie?
I think they were inspired by my work. Thank you very much. But mine was scarier. The great Jordan Peele classic was an amazing, amazing film. But mine was way more terrifying because it basically looked, first of all, proliferation of deans, et cetera. Second of all, at the economics. Of some of these institutions of higher learning and how they were being,
radically transformed. And my conclusion was, there's actually no way you could fix this. And after the piece came out, I got 7 or 8 calls from fairly prominent presidents of biggish universities. And I went and met with every single one of them. And the thing that I really wanted is to be proven wrong. And I sat with lunch. I remember this very clearly with one of them. And he said, well, you're wrong. And I said, well, I'd love to be wrong. Tell me how to fix this. And he starts kind of equivocating. And I said, well, what could you do? And he looks at me dead on and says, well, I have no power here. I'm only the president. And I think he meant it as a joke, but at the same time, systemically speaking, because our friends on the left love talking about systemic this, that, and everything, what would you do? You have an entrenched faculty. You have a student body that's been selected for these purposes for decades on, save for coming in, firing everyone, and risking massive lawsuits from your entire sort of labor body. I don't see any real solution to this, do you?
Solution, if we're talking about reforming the elite institutions, I'm very pessimistic. It's not something that I personally will want to spend my time on, right. because I only want to walk around in the day with my intestines in a knot for I don't know, a third of the day, right. And I would like to have some sense that that there's a goal that could actually be achieved. That I think we have to look at this and say, the landscape there is very unpromising. But first of all, we can educate donors. That a lot of I had an experience when I was at Princeton. I was known as a conservative. Every campus has a couple of conservatives that whether they're really conservative. Some are. There's I won't name any names, but there's a well-worn career path of the campus conservative, where they proclaim that they are conservatives, and that way everyone else at the university can say, well, we're open-minded. We have look at John. John is a conservative, yeah. But when you actually look at John's positions, they're conservative only in name only. They bear no resemblance to the positions that any conservative outside of the university is taking. They'll be libertarians or something like this. Anyway, the university knew what it was doing. There was a guy who came in, wanted to give a lot of money to the university, but said, and was somewhat interested in the Middle East. That wasn't a major concern, but had some interest. And he said, but I'm conservative. I don't want to, give my money to somebody who's going to teach, queer theory or fund studies of lesbian nuns in medieval Italy or whatever. So they put me in front of him. Not that the money was going to go to me, but just to say, look, we have one. We have one too. And then I learned. Then the donor talked to me a little bit about what was going on, and he basically was giving the money without any restrictions on it. And I said, why don't you put some demands on it, that it do this and not that or what? And he said, Mike, they've got me by the balls. I want to get my son into Princeton. This is what it's about, really, right? Partly it's that. Partly you have a guy like that who, if I was, opening a bakery, he would make sure to get 51%, and he was going to finance it. He'd make sure to get 51% of the equity in the company and actually take control of it. And he'd make sure he had all kinds of levers of control. But there's something about a leafy campus and memories of lost youth that leads these guys, plus the desire to get their children into the university, that leads them to just write these checks without any restrictions. If more and more of those people give their money to alternative institutions that are openly proclaiming a different view, I think that will change. And those alternative institutions which are springing up, there's a fantastic program we all know at the University of Florida, run by Will Inboden. There are these civics programs that are proliferating around the country. They'll become, if there's an alternative ecosystem where you can have conservative thinkers or people who are just open to entertaining conservative ideas, And there are career paths in that arena. What the universities had until now is a complete monopoly on
A jobs program.
a jobs program. So if you have conservative ideas and you want to work in a university, you know you have to hide them because you can't get a job. And of course, you don't necessarily want to stay at whatever institution you start at. So you're not going to express those ideas because you won't get promoted and you won't have any job advancement.
So before we descend into darker, more terrifying realms, we agree as a sort of kind of interim conclusion that the universities matter, if only because they train and educate the next generation of elites. We agree also that they have been
they train all the bureaucrats trained in universities.
Completely hijacked beyond relief, and what we're looking at is more akin to a hostage situation than anything else. We agree that the current measures that the Trump administration is taking, including the funding, including accreditation, are tremendously helpful and should continue with robust enthusiasm. And we agree that a path forward for non-governmental actors, including donors, et cetera, should probably focus on new kinds of institutions. By the way, do you see
both things? It's new institutions, but continuing the attack on Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, Cornell.
Absolutely.
It's very important because those institutions are not going to. They're going to remain the premier institutions, and they're going to have an oversized impact on our cultural and political life.
Do you see, for example, a focus on foreign money as being one kind of module that we should increase our activity in?
Oh, sure. I was not even aware of some of these statistics that Asaf gave us and about a number of foreign students. What we have to demand of these institutions is that they be national institutions and that they serve a national purpose. And it's not a bad word, nationalism. We're trying to build a society here. We're not trying to make the world a better place. But there's a problem that we have in doing this, both in terms domestically and in our foreign policy. Transnational progressivism is a global vision, and they know where they want to go. They know who they're against, and they're working together to achieve it. They recognize each other instantly across national boundaries, and they know how to.
In every Davos gathering.
Every Davos gathering, every
Lake Cuomo cocktail party.
Right. So, and every EU confab, right? So we don't have the alternative. We don't know what. It's been so long since we spent any time thinking about how do you educate an American today to be a good citizen of our democracy? And today, because of all the changes in cultural changes in America, demographic changes in America, institutional changes, the advent of AI and so on, where is the thought about this, and where's the community behind this effort? I don't think we have a national conservative education vision that's widely accepted among conservatives. And it doesn't even have to be conservatives. It just has to be a national. You can have left and right, but a vision for building our nation.
So, Mike Duran, you're a great American, and you're sitting next to a beautifully well-lit American flag. Give us as we say in academia, toward, which is the word that we use when we don't actually want to think about something or solve an actual problem, toward a vision of American, let's not call it nationalism, American purpose. Because I 100% agree. There is a lot of talk from the sort of, shall we say, America-centric corners about retribution. Well, how could we punish these institutions? There's not a lot of talk about either building alternative institutions or even defining what it is that we want to achieve. So, Mike Duran, on behalf of all Americans, tell us.
I wasn't ready for that question, but it starts from the most fundamental things. We have a different view of the human person. The transnational progressives who run our universities believe that human nature is malleable. There's no fixed human nature. So this is Judith Butler, whom Asaf mentioned. She made her whole career on saying that there's no such innate thing as gender, for example,
Even
among
bodies
other
are
things.
very malleable.
It's all performative. This is the essence of it, and it's all about the individual's position in a power structure. Now this goes way beyond English departments, and it started out in the wacky ideas in English departments and comparative literature departments. Today, in a lot of biology departments, you cannot get a position if you don't submit as part of your job application a list of all of the things you've done to advance DEI and other and social justice and so on. So you can't get a job in biology if you don't submit to the fact that you don't assert actually that biology has no imposes no innate restrictions
biology
on.
basically doesn't exist.
Biology, as we tended to understand it, is not socially constructed. So this is true. We have the same thing in departments where you wouldn't think this kind of stuff exists. Engineering, where you have to, because we now have to build buildings that are eco-friendly and buildings that are going to build a better society. Not buildings that are designed just to make your family more happy and secure. So it starts with the human person, that human nature is malleable, and that we can control things that historically we have thought we can't control, not just human nature, but also climate. It's all about basically their vision of a well-ordered society is a small group of a managerial elite that can guide the development of society toward their utopian vision. And a well-functioning democracy full of people who believe that human nature is fixed and that the job of people in positions of responsibility is to do the least amount of harm, to create the proper processes that will allow people with wildly different points of view to argue out and agree on a policy. So checks and balances and so on. So one of the things that I think we would want to have is to educate Americans for democracy, we have to have a serious component of their education about the founding of America, the beliefs of the founding fathers, the Federalist view of the world. They all believe that human nature was broken, limited, that human individuals were inherently ambitious and duplicitous. And you can't believe in the righteousness of any particular managerial elite. You have to create checks and balances to make sure that the broken, faulty human nature will not take over government.
I fully agree, and I think I sort of goaded you with this philosophical.
I wasn't expecting to.
Right question because I actually think it is a useful. Sort of jumping point into the task at hand. I think increasingly, and you're seeing this not just in the United States of America, you're seeing this elsewhere, pretty much everywhere else in the world, in which we have radically clashing definitions of what democracy means. In Israel, for example, my native country where I was born, famously, Chief Justice Aaron Barak explained, as he was radically transforming the country's judicial system, to decide, in his great words, Hakol Shafit, everything is judgeable, because why shouldn't the court reverse?
Judiciable.
Everything
no,
is
isn't it judiciable?
It's a really beautiful, almost biblical word. And he said, look, you have to understand, there are two things. There's democracy, which is the process of people going and casting ballots. That is faulty because the people are smelly.
Yeah.
He didn't quite put it like that, but he didn't really have to. And then he said, and there's something called demokratia mahutit, there's essential democracy, or essentialist democracy. Essentialist democracy is a democracy that is protected by the people who are capable of understanding the intricacies of democracy, which is not you guys with the beards and the bad ideas. It is us, because only we are intelligent enough to understand the implications and the repercussions. This is the exact language of, to go a few blocks down the road, democracy dies in darkness.
Yeah.
Right? This is the exact same language that we're seeing here. So, Mike, now we're talking...
He's a transnational progressive.
Correct, but now we're talking not just about academia, we're talking about journalism, corporate, we're talking about a whole kind of generation of people and huge American institutions that are so awash in this stuff that if you come out and just say, actually, no, I don't believe any of it, you are still treated, despite the quote, quote unquote vibe shift of the last election, you're still treated as some kind of pariah. So when we think about new institutions that we're building across the board, where do we begin?
So look, this is what is exciting about the Trump administration, because everybody has been propagandized in this nonsense from through all of this, our schooling, and we don't believe it. We don't believe it. Now, a lot of us are not self-aware. We're not really aware that we're getting propaganda constantly on climate, on race, on social justice, on policing, on foreign policy, on Israel. We're getting propagandized constantly because it's all being put through this prism of transnational progressivism. But there's a revolt against it, right? No one in America, or I shouldn't say no one. I always love reading those Pew surveys about what generally people believe. And so you ask, is it right to murder someone? It's like 95% of people say no. Murder's not acceptable.
Would we like to meet the 5%?
Yeah. And then you drop after murder. A man should be loyal to his wife. Shouldn't have affairs.
31%.
87%. And then after that, you get there are a couple of issues like that. You shouldn't steal really basic Ten Commandments stuff. You have a relatively high majority of people who are for the Ten Commandments, or most of them. I don't know how they would feel about coveting thy neighbor's ass. Maybe that would be that would drop down further. But if we ask this question of the average American, can a man become a woman? Can a woman become a man? I'm willing to bet, I haven't seen it, that we're going to be up in the sort of Ten Commandments arena. But you can't say it in the American workplace. You can't say it. People are afraid of losing their jobs, so they won't. And so they won't. Or you look like you're a little bit of a freak. That you're obsessed with this. Oh, come on, let it go. What are you? Leave them alone over there in the corner. But they're using the issue to shut you up, right? And to make sure that you can't express yourself in this way. So, but the amazing thing is, the majority of people don't believe it, and this is why Trump won. And one of the reasons why Trump won, and it's why Trump is going after Harvard, whether he'll be successful or not. He knows it's really good politics. Most people understand that they're being preached to by this managerial elite, or people who aspire to be the managerial elite, and they don't like it. So that is really great, because there's a rule which I don't have a good, which I made up, and you can help me formulate it better. But if you have 11 people or 10 people and they're all saying the same thing, and then you add one more who's also saying the same thing, the relative value of that additional person is about zero.
Right.
It's not. So if you have 9 and then you add one more, the value of that 10th person is not 10%. Right? It's 0.222% or something. If you have 10 people all saying the same thing, and you have one person who stands up and in an articulate manner says, no, this is all hogwash, the power of that voice is much more powerful than just 10% of the others, right? That person has a bullhorn. If they're saying it clearly and articulately, and so on, and they pick the right issues, men competing in women's sports. Who doesn't think that's an abomination, you know? But obviously, a lot of people aren't going to say it because they're afraid of losing their money or their job or whatever. So remember, it begins with the human person. It begins there. But the whole vision is we can remake all of society and control and change everything. So if we created an ecosystem that wasn't just against transnational progressivism, but had a positive vision about national education, the purpose of education, and we're moving in that direction. That's going to be extremely powerful because there's a huge constituency out there that believes all of this. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be taught and propagandized. It's common sense to them. It's what they got in their home. The transnational progressive vision is working against common sense. It has a monopoly over a lot of the institutions, but it can be undermined relatively quickly if there is a dedicated minority that knows what it wants. That's the problem. It can't just be a protest. One of the problems you have in foreign policy is, so if we wanted to create an alliance of transnational conservatives or transnational nationalists, right? I mean, it's a contradiction in terms. So if I look at Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, and I look at Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey, and Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Modi in India, and I can name some others. To me, they are all very similar structurally with respect to where they stand in relation to transnational progressivism. They're all about asserting national sovereignty against this managerial elite that was propped up by the international system.
And so I'm interrupting to say...
Sorry, can I just last thing? Just this last point. I realize I'm going on. But look at how they are inherently vociferous. Right. Or, you know, Netanyahu and Erdogan are not just oil and water. They repel each other. Modi and Erdogan repel each other. So how do you take that as the United States and put that into a coherent coalition against transnational?
Interestingly enough, that was going to be my next question. Translate that into foreign policy now.
Well, it's tough. I mean, the end. I can't do it cleverly here because we have the same problem domestically as well. We have a loose coalition of people who find the progressive monopoly over our educational institutions and media and so on, or near monopoly, to be oppressive, but they don't have a united vision about what to do about it. We'd have to come together and think about certain general principles that we can all sign on to, and come up with in education and in foreign policy in a program that we can get behind.
So are you advocating a sort of like Monroe Doctrine for transnational nationalism for the 21st century?
Why a Monroe Doctrine? How do you mean?
A sort of global American-led New World Order that collects these players, understands the repellent
the United States.
Right.
This is how we won the Cold War. We didn't win the Cold War by it was the Soviet Union that said, in our system, you have to sign on to the following propositions, and we have a single unified view of where the world is going. The United States didn't say that. The United States said, that is the Soviet proposition. Our proposition is that you're on our side if you're against that, and we'll work together and you can be you can have whatever form of government fits your society and your place in the world.
I will say something that doesn't bother me, as you know, because we talk, but I imagine bothers at least 3/4 of the people sitting in this room and a majority of people listening. They would say, well,
what does all this have to do with anti-Semitism?
No.
I have an answer.
That is not at all the question. The question is, it seems like you're advocating, and this is a problem, of course, that plagued, the great President Reagan. Well, some of these societies are not societies that seem to share, would be one foreign policy way of looking at it. I'm being so delicate with my words here.
Yeah.
Share American values and commitments to things like human rights, freedom, et cetera, et cetera.
Totally.
And so how are we to, this is a problem that comes up circuitously every 50 years or so. How are we to think about that as we align ourselves with people like Erdogan, who I agree with you as someone who is, essential in the region?
I don't see it as a problem at all. Because I just look at how we won the Cold War. We didn't win the Cold War by saying you have to sign up to our values. We understood our values. There's the United States. There's the Canadians. There's the Europeans, and that essential community of peoples has to be preserved, especially the Europeans. You might add to that some of the countries in East Asia, but this has to be preserved. We cannot preserve it. We cannot preserve it from behind a wall. Our moats of the Atlantic and the Pacific. We have to be out there in the world to preserve it. And so there are lots of countries whose interests intersect with that community of democracies who themselves are not democracies, and we shouldn't look too closely at it. It's a big mistake. Ronald Reagan, who we remember now as the great promoter of democracy in the world, did not promote democracy in the Middle East. Ronald Reagan worked with the Saudis on the price of oil to stick it to the Soviets, who increasingly were, like the Russians today, were dependent on oil for their economy. So I want to do what Ronald Reagan did. No one thinks that Ronald Reagan didn't have values, but Ronald Reagan, it's just like you running your household. You understand that your neighbors may have radically different values than you, but you don't want to be, in a feud with the person living across the hall from you. So you tolerate.
Well, I live in New York, man,
Yeah.
so I'm always in a feud with people across the hall. Point well taken.
It's a very simple thing.
I feel we have been way sunnier for way too long, and it is time to.
We have to say a couple words about anti-Semitism.
That's what we're doing now,
because I see it as related.
And we're doing this in the darkest way possible. It is my understanding, and I wonder if you share it, that one of the least understood sort of core tenets, maybe the core tenet of anti-Semitism, is that it actually has absolutely freaking nothing to do with the Jews.
Yeah.
It is an affliction that, as Asaf mentioned, happens in societies that has no Jews, see no Jews. It is a kind of mind virus that corrupts and is therefore so useful to people who want to use that particular energizing moment in order to destabilize societies or move societies towards a certain point of view. The question that I want to ask, and this will have a few kind of branches to it, is this. We have now witnessed just this last month, as you said in your introduction, that the hour is very late, that we have not just institutions that are captured by these forces, not just great big kind of social organizations. A classic example, just as a quick aside, is if you read the way the media covered the Molotov cocktail attack in Boulder, Colorado, it was unbelievable. I'll do this very briefly. It began with alleged, hey, we don't know what's going on. When videos online already are saying like free Palestine, then it suggested
Nothing
that,
to see here.
Then it suggested that maybe the attack was on a march for Gaza. One I think it was NBC used the term hostage awareness demonstration. Like you have irritable bowel syndrome awareness month. This is a hostage awareness month. It's just something that you live with. Then CNN called the protests quote unquote peaceful. ABC ran to say, well, the real problem here, of course, is Islamophobia. And then USA Today said, well, this is really a shame because this guy's daughter, well, she had a dream of being a doctor. Well, I have a dream of not being firebombed personally, but this is just an indication of how deep the problem is. Some of the problem is addressable, as Asaf said, sort of the fund and deport. We're seeing cases. We talked a little bit about targeting institutions. The Trump administration is also very wisely, in my opinion, targeting individuals like Mahmoud Khalil in Colombia, who had a lot to do with it. But some of these people are American citizens. And increasingly, we see more and more and more sort of entrenched groups of organized people who believe in this. What do we do?
So on the university level, the universities have to enforce their own codes about you can't take over buildings. You can't keep other students from going to class. Class should be about what the subject matter of the class and not the protest that's going on outside. If you're not enforcing those codes, those are simple, very simple things. And so if you're not enforcing that, then you are infringing on the rights of not just the Jewish student, but certainly the Jewish students who have to listen to all the attacks on them, but everyone else who went to college to get an education. So all of the things that they're doing, going against the DEI, looking at whether they enforce their codes and infringement on the Jewish students, that's all effective. So we just need more of that. For sure. I do want, if you'll allow me to say how we got, you pushed me, I went off in this abstract direction. I want to bring it back to Jews a little bit. Because why is it that the anti-Semitism is such a hot issue, such a useful tool in this framework, both domestically and internationally. Internationally, it is used because the United States and Israel have been historically joined at the hip. It is useful for our enemies to push this because it's a stand-in for the American empire. Right? All of the claims about the Jews and the being inherently oppressive and causing all the wars. Carrying out genocide against the Palestinians and so on. That is an attack on the American order. That's why the Chinese and the Russians are spreading this all over Africa and Asia where there are no Jews and TikTok. But it's also an effective wedge issue because the Arab world is not reconciled to the existence of Israel. It's that there are lots of trends that are attractive compared to what we used to know, but it is still not reconciled. And so this is a great wedge issue between the United States and its Arab allies. And clearly, it's also a great wedge issue domestically in the United States because progressivism has latched on to the Palestinian question and made it akin to the race question. Not akin; it's just an outgrowth. Through the intersectional worldview, it says that all forms of oppression are the
Can I riff on this philosophically for a second?
Sure.
Because I think it goes. I'm going to yes and you as you do in good improv comedy shows. Because I think you point to something very interesting, but I think it actually goes about 150,000 feet deeper, which is this one.
Are you saying that I'm shallow and superficial?
In very nice ways, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you were doing the good thing. You were trying to keep us at a high level, but I think it's actually interesting and useful to look at these deeper realms. I think part of the reason why you see the insistence of kind of tying this together is, it's a white versus black issue. It's a colonialism, West versus East issue. Jews present an inherent problem to the, as you so beautifully defined it, the global progressivist worldview. What are we? Are we white? Are we black? Are we East? Are we West? The answer is we predate all these categories. These categories are meaningless to us. We live completely outside of them. That is the genius of the thing. We are at once and the same time a people, a nation, a faith system, which is why Israel is so offensive to the progressivist international order. It is all the things that they hate in one compact, cool package. And I think the idea that this country, as my friend Dr. Rabbi Ari Lam likes to say, the founding moral document of this country is the vision of the prophets of Israel, every bit as the Constitution is the founding political document. And so if you really want to destabilize America, start with the actual foundational philosophical principle of, as Dr. King so beautifully put it, we believe in the content, we seek the content of someone's character rather than the color of someone's skin. let's reverse that, and then let's claim that Jews are white, which is a patently ridiculous claim for a population as diverse in this, and then let's claim they're a colonizer of their historical homeland, where there's thousands and thousands of years of archaeology of these people living there, speaking this language and calling themselves that. It's this inversion that I think is deeply telling.
And we have a community of people, a large, I don't know what percentage of our population. I'm talking about Christians, evangelical Christians, who retain the notion that there is this covenant between God and the Jews, which remains until this day and has to be honored until this day. And this plays a direct role in our politics. These are also the same people who are saying that there is a fixed human nature, and it is God-given, and we can't change it. So they are calling for a relationship with Israel, and they're calling for a different view of the human person than the progressives are, and the progressives want to wipe them out. So it isn't just about the Jews. It's a whole vision of the nature of human beings, the purpose for the United States to exist, the way it should exist, its place in it's the nature of its foreign policy, and so on. So it's an attack on all of that. And that's what the universities are. The universities are these bastions, these fortresses in this fight against that other vision of America, which exists in its purest form in the evangelicals are the vessel. I don't know what to say. The instrument that is holding on to the original view. The evangelical view of human nature is the same view of human nature that produced the Federalist Papers, right? And so there's a cultural memory in that regard. But then there's a lot of other people who are not necessarily evangelical, but they still have a view of human nature and a view of institutions and American purpose that is congruent with that view.
I want to ask one more question, and again, make sure we end on a low note, because that's what you do in Washington, before opening up to conversation. You brought up repeatedly, which I think is a very smart way to help us think about this, a sort of Cold War and a Cold War mindset. It is clear that we're looking at a sort of an actual competing ideology, and we've talked a lot about things that would be helpful from a foreign policy that had a Reagan-esque sort of American leadership kind of coalition of the willing type of situation, to building new institutions. I wonder what else could be done. I'm thinking, for example, in 2014, and then again, I believe in 2017, Senator Ted Cruz brought up what he called the ETA, the Expatriation Terrorist Act, which is his suggestion to say, look, the nature of warfare and national security threats has changed. We're no longer talking about just sort of like competing states or state actors. We're looking at organizations, ideologies, a sort of progressive kind of milieu, which is much more diffuse with Iranian influence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is time to amend the penal code to sort of broaden the definition of treason and colluding with terrorist organizations, and make sure that we have tools in case an American citizen chooses, and I don't mean some dumb college kid saying, oh, look, this Hezbollah flag is really cool, I'll put it on my wall. I'm talking the kind of stuff that Asaf mentioned before of actually being in communication with the literal hostage takers, disseminating their talking points, raising funds for them, et cetera, to be able to expatriate, to revoke the citizenship of that person, which is an extreme act. What other things, first of all, how do you feel about this? And second of all, what other measures might we take as we fight, call it the new Cold War?
What you say is fine. I'm not a legal expert. I don't know how you go about crafting the law so it can actually be useful and not be abused. So, but I'm all in favor of throwing terrorists out of the country. When I worked in the White House, there was a rumor that went around the diplomatic corps. I was responsible for the Middle East in the George W. Bush administration for 2 years.
Easy enough job.
I solved all the problems. The others screwed it up. But this rumor went around that there was a high Iranian official who was in Washington, and he was here for secret talks on the Iran nuclear issue. And these diplomats kept coming and saying, Mike, so-and-so's here. And I said, no, this is not happening. It's not happening. It's not happening. And then finally a British guy came and he said, Mike, I'm coming here because I like you and I respect you. And I want you to know you're losing credibility in the community here because the guy has been spotted on the street. I just saw him. I know him. I used to be stationed in Tehran, and I just saw him at the 17th and K, And so I went to my boss and I said, listen, this is getting really embarrassing to me. If these talks are going on, just let me know and I'll just shut up. But you got to clue me in. And he said, well, this is the National Security Advisor. He said, if we're conducting secret talks, I don't know about it. so I'm not, it's happening above my level, right? So anyway, the long story short, the guy had a green card, and he came to the United States on a private visit, and he came in through the land border from Canada, and for some reason he didn't get flagged in the system for that reason. I don't know why that did. So then I thought, this guy is a senior official in a terror-sponsoring country, and he's got a green card. We should revoke it. So I started sending emails, revoke, 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 and I was called out on the carpet, and I was told, Mike, sit down and shut up. Political appointees should never talk about immigration issues. I never understood why it was so toxic. But when I see the Trump administration starting to raise these questions, I'm very happy to see it raised because it's ridiculous how many senior Iranian officials and their children have green cards. And why should we ever have this? How do we benefit from this in any way? I wanted to say something before about the Jews not being outside of the system. It's not just because of the color of their skin. The whole transnational view says we want to have this managerial elite. So it's basically the vanguard party. That is the vanguard party, which you can join. It's sort of like the Communist Vanguard Party, bringing us to a better world, one where we control the climate and we control human nature and we mold human beings in society to exactly what we want. The justification for the vanguard, traditionally, historically, is race. That's it starts with the position of blacks in the United States and in U.S. society, and the purpose of the vanguard is to create equality for the blacks. It then widens to other identity groups, and the vanguard you can be non-black or Hispanic or lesbian or whoever is included in the oppressed group. That Judith Butler is the great person to go to see who gets in there now. But if you have Jews in the vanguard as Jews, then it screws the whole thing up because you slip in through the back door, the U.S.-Israel alliance, right, but also all the evangelicals who are supporting that. And the Jews, the Jews can join the vanguard if they join as what was
right,
Asaf's word? I'm Jewish, but you have to join as something other than a proud Jew.
Just this week, and with this we'll open it up to some questions. Just this week, Rabbi Sharon Brous, who's a very prominent liberal rabbi, progressive rabbi from LA, said, this is really tremendously unfair, this violence, and what the terrorists need to understand. I'm paraphrasing by a smidge. What the terrorists need to understand is that most of us are good Jews. We don't like Bibi. So you really shouldn't shoot us. I mean, come on, man. Words be
Unfortunately,
good.
I heard a heartbreaking testimonial from a woman in Far Aza, maybe, or one of the kibbutzim that was attacked on October 7th, and she was just she actually got out, like she hid under her bed or something, or in her what do you call the
Mamad,
mamad?
the secure
Yeah. What do
room,
what do you call it in English?
secure.
Shelter.
Right.
Shelter. Secure. Personal. Safe room.
It's not. Yeah.
Safe room. So anyway, it doesn't matter. She was just recounting. She was just on the radio talking about what happened, and she said, that she was trying to keep her daughter quiet. She had a little daughter, 5, 6 years old, and she told her, she tried to calm her down and said, "Don't worry. They know that we're the good Jews, who don't like bibi, so they're not going to come kill us." And it was heartbreaking, actually.
That it is. Yeah. And with that, let us take a few questions. Hi, Sam.
Hi, I have a little bit of a question on the foreign policy side, in a sense that it's true that there's this transnational progressivism with other countries, and some others are fighting against it. But for example, in Canada, there are investigations going on Canadian Jews, some Israelis basically, who some of them are, and they went to serve for the IDF. And they're now under investigation. And Canada is a very valuable partner, etc. The United States shares a lot of intelligence with. There are a lot of collaboration in that regard. So there's this trend where U.S. allies themselves are espousing this anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. What should the United States do about that?
Sanction them. The United States should sanction them. Should sanction the individuals pursuing those investigations, and it should sanction the institutions. And if it did that seriously, it would change it very quickly. We have to be aware. Unfortunately, there's in circles around the Trump administration. There are increasingly these voices, Tucker Carlson's a major one, that are saying that the Israelis are causing the conflict in the Middle East, and they're drawing us unnecessarily into war. So it's, again, the Jews are causing all the conflict and causing us our problems.
The Jews are our misfortune, I believe, is
the Jews are our misfortune, and
nice
and this is an anti-Semitic view that all the wars Tucker Carlson's become a platform for this, that all the wars in the Middle East are caused by the Jews, and all of our participation in these wars is for the Jews, and this is creating a space. This is part of an argument that the U.S. needs to pull back from the Middle East, and that Israel's conflicts are not really our conflicts in any way. There's a kind of more legitimate way to make that point, and then there's the Tucker Carlson illegitimate way to make that point. But what's happening then is, you see there's going to be this conference that the French are going to put on to recognize a Palestinian state. I think what's happening there is what I suspect. I don't have the smoking gun, but I think there's a lot of Gulf money that is going into the French. The French have their own reasons for wanting to do it, but our Gulf allies are propelling it, and they're going to go around through the French, and the French are going to proselytize among other European nations to get more and more countries to sign on. The United States should be saying openly and strongly that the war in Gaza is part of an effort by Iran to divide the United States and its allies and to undermine the American security system, And the United States does not support this effort of France and I think others to go change the balance of power over this question in Europe. And we need to make sure that it's understood that that if they pursue this, there will be American sanctions. And I'm not just talking about economic sanctions, but also political sanctions. There will be a price to pay with the United States for this kind of behavior. Unfortunately, I think lack of complete ideological coherence in the Trump administration's policy, I would say ambivalence over Israel, right, is creating a space where a lot of this kind of activity can take place.
Indeed. Yes.
I have another question on the
Hold on.
foreign. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I have another question on the foreign policy thread, and it could be a similar answer to what you just mentioned. But you talked a little bit about anti-Semitism as not being about Jews and it being sort of a pretense to indoctrinate communities into a certain worldview. We've seen in recent years, and it's been a consistent phenomenon, but specifically in recent years, an increase in cooperation and cohesion between theocratic and authoritarian adversarial regimes like Iran and Russia, with more socially progressive regimes in Latin America and Central and South America. And I was wondering what could, specifically fostering a joint anti-Western and anti-US sentiment on issues of anti-Semitism and from like a counterterrorism perspective. I was wondering what the U.S. could do to preempt and combat anti-Semitic threats in the Western Hemisphere going forward.
Well, I'll start with a kind of obvious, just riffing on Mike's Cold War thing. I have a lot of very perverse hobbies. One of them is looking at the USAID spending. I don't fully understand, in fact, I do fully understand how this tremendous arm of so-called soft power went from sort of disseminating clear American values to the rest of the world to being a major engine, not just of the progressivist global alliance, but also of sort of punishing people who are opposed to it in other countries. I had a piece not long ago in the Wall Street Journal in which I looked. The journal was, to their credit, very cautious, so they only published the stuff for which there were actual receipts. There were many tens of millions more that were sort of like back-channeled through all kinds of larger organizations. But the amount of American federal tax dollars that went to trying to unseat Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, this is a completely illegal, like blatantly illegal move. Here, cultural organization that only seems to do one thing. It is just art against the government, plus lawfare, plus organizing demonstrations, plus. I think a really good thing that you could do quite easily is recalibrating the same mechanism that you already have in place and making sure that the interests that it follows aren't propaganda on behalf of our enemies, but rather support for our allies.
That's a great example, though, of what I was trying to talk about before, which is the absence of cadres on our side. Yeah. What do we want to? What's our answer to these people abroad? We want national sovereignty. We want an alliance of sovereign states who are interested in preserving their sovereignty. Our argument against China has to be careful about getting into bed with China because your sovereignty will be undermined. But people who think like this, who have the alternative view of transnational progressivism as the purpose of American foreign policy, are few and far between. None of them have ever been interested in USAID. And so USAID for years has just been a huge pot of money for the transnational progressives to use for their causes abroad, and a lot of that money that they're using abroad is to fund cadres here in the U.S. Because that the money goes through contractors, and it keeps the contractors and that whole
a couple of
alive.
weeks ago, when the whole USAID sort of budget cutting was kind of in the news, I was driving here in D.C. and I saw a bunch of people, who were kind of not the usual suspects. These are people, they were chanting USA, USA, but I was looking at them and they're like holding Palestinian flags and like trans flags and all kinds of, not exactly Hamas flags, but like PLO flags. And I was like, why are they shouting USA? It's like, oh no, they're shouting U.S. aid.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
But we have to be fair. They do have a vision of America as
They do.
well. It's just like one of the mainline Christian churches by my house, mainline Protestant churches, has a trans flag hanging from it. And you'd think that the gospel and trans ideology would not be.
It's not just that. The one by my house, for example, has a big banner, bless you, that also said, pride is a divine right. It's like, remind me what goeth before the fall? I don't know. Maybe I misremember my book of Proverbs. Would you like to take the podium and sum up
You're
this
very
gathering?
good at that. You're very good at that.
There is little to say except for thank you all for coming. Thank you, Zineb. Thank you, Asaf. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Hudson Institute, for being really one of the only places to be in the vanguard of this incredibly important effort. I think the main thing to say is that, to quote a great fighter for freedom and democracy, this is not the beginning of the end. This is not even the end of the beginning. We have a very, very long and very arduous battle ahead of us. But since this is an anti-Semitism and Jewish event, if Jewish history teaches us anything, is that the erring in the wilderness may take 1 or 2 or 40 years, but the promised land always beckons. So thank you.
Thank you.